Before I get into how we grew with our team, both my team from 3 to 85, as you mentioned, but also the company from 55 people when I joined to around 325 now, I just wanted to tell everybody about what 1stdibs is. We focus on the high-end luxury marketplace, full-price goods. We have about a $27 billion core market of people that are buying primarily furniture, which is enormous. So our job and what we've been doing for the past 16 years has been cutting into that offline market and bringing that online into the modern age, removing some of the opacity that is in this marketplace so that our buyers can actually browse products from all over the world. We have 3,000 different dealers that are on our platform. They're in countries, primarily Europe. There's also a lot in North America, and we have Australia as well. And we are constantly expanding. Type of stuff we sell, you can see it here. This is this week's furniture new listings. We are releasing things. You can probably tell the price point is fairly high. I'm a big fan of the Nakashima table. If anybody wants to buy it for me, I'd appreciate it. For fun, sometimes it's good if you want to see the type of goods by price. If anybody could afford this, I definitely want to talk to you afterwards. And if you're more of a jewelry person, we have some fairly nice jewelry that's also on sale. The market's an interesting thing. So like as I mentioned, we're primarily furniture. We're also in jewelry, fashion, and fine art. The $27 billion addressable market right now, if we include all of the other adjacent markets we're in, it's actually $371 billion. Again, primarily, this is all offline, and as every year more and more is coming online, and we've been able to position ourselves as the leader for these type of goods to be purchased online. The way the business works, we have these 3,000 dealers. They use us as a portal to list and advertise their goods. Buyers and interior designers go onto our site. They view the goods and are able to purchase it. This sort of is a self-replicating cycle because eventually they're not going to want to sell this merchandise. It goes back to the dealers who are able to list it onto our site. It's a big business. We calculate that about $1 billion of goods was sold that was listed on our platform. Only 143 of that was through the platform last year, and we see that as the addressable market right now without growing any supply or growing any of our adjacent markets. If we close the gap and bring all that merchandise onto our marketplace, it's the way to grow the business. Our average spend for a customer is over $4,000 a year, which is pretty fantastic. And what I'm going to talk about a little bit here is how we got there and also how, once we got our venture capital funding, how we've grown the business. It was started in 2001, and it was a very different world in 2001. All this stuff was offline. Our founder was in the Paris flea market, and he's like, this stuff should probably be online. He started listing things. The world was a different place. Only 8% of the world was online. E-commerce was 32 billion. It wasn't pennies, but it's about 350 billion now. The most important thing that happened that has changed 1stdibs over the years is that when we started, we were a listing site. We were like a Craigslist for vintage furniture, where the buyers would see the goods, they would then connect with the dealers offline and make the sale. Since the VC funding came in and me and the team have started working on the platform, we've actually made it a fully functioning e-commerce marketplace. And because of that, we've been able to take the money that is being spent on our site and reinvest it into the platform and continue to make improvements. Future, where we're going? Right now, all of the relatively low-priced goods has been captured by the Amazons and the Walmarts of the world. What we're capturing is the $5,000+ orders, and we are becoming the preeminent destination for all this goods to be purchased. When I joined, the company was 11 years old already. It had grown naturally for the first 11 years without any VC funding. The VC funding came in. New team came in, I came in to lead the tech team, and the very first thing that I realized was how I knew absolutely nothing about the business. I didn't know the people that were involved. I didn't know what our dealers who were listing the merchandise, what their needs were. I didn't quite understand the culture. And it was an important thing for people. How many people here are engineers, actually? Awesome. Some of the later slides will be very much for you, and I'll try to make it not so technically painful for everybody else. The platform was hard to understand from a technical perspective, but of all the things to learn when joining the company, that was the easiest part. The harder part was understanding what the people needed to go forward. So a lot of the beginning was, we called it like 1stdibs University. The different areas of the business were coming and presenting to the new team members. How does the business market itself? How do we grow? Where are the pain points? So it was learning and being humble was very important. The other thing that was important in the beginning was knowing that the existing team had no idea who these new the new executives that were now in charge after the VC funding came in, what they were planning. So day one was learning. Day two was realizing how bad the situation was. This chart, for people who don't know, there's a Google Webmaster Tool. Basically, the Googlebot crawls your website, and it reports on how slow or how fast your site is. And what this is, when I joined the company, the speed of the website in seconds for Google to pull an individual page. So it was painful to the point where searching was actually 24 seconds long for people to use the platform. Still did, though. But it was a great thing in some ways for me as a CTO, because I was able to get in there and go, that's pretty easy to fix. And then, speed was 5% of this at the first board meeting. Board members were very impressed. They then expected me to make that 10,000% improvement every year. Wasn't able to do that, but it was a nice thing to come in as a CTO. When I came, I had to figure out how to move forward. It's very tempting when you join a company to say that, and engineers do this every time they get a new piece of code or get a piece of code that someone else developed. They assume that everything before them is utter garbage, and they have the natural tendency to want to just get rid of it and do everything new. It's rarely the right move to do that. Usually, the company we came in, the company had been successful for 10 years or 11 years before we came in, so there was obviously doing something right. And there was a lot of humility needed to go, wait, there's a lot of problems, a lot of bad, but finding the good that's there, allowing yourself to use that as a base to build upon was critical. The next thing that's important is figuring out your team and who the personnel is that's already there. Not everyone's great. Letting the people go that are problems, very important. But you also have to evaluate fairly the people who are there, because there's definitely the hierarchy that might be there could be completely messed up. When I joined, the best developer that was on the current team when I joined was not running the team. He was a developer, but getting to know them, you get to see that the existing seniority doesn't necessarily always make sense. Culture is super important. It's hard to emphasize how important. What we were able to do is both keep the culture that was originally there. Big holiday celebrations happened, or Halloween was a big thing, but also add our own things like pranking everyone every chance we get with the tin foil, doing hackathons, taking people to US Open tennis match every year, or visiting a very lovely castle that's outside of the city. We also did a lot of strategy meetings. We still do. Every 6 months, we have 2-day meetings where we go and we talk about what the drivers are of the businesses, what are the main strategies we need to focus on, and we define what's not important. So almost knowing what isn't important that you're currently doing is almost as important as knowing what is. It allows you to ignore or put on ice or somehow suspend all the extra parts of your business which seem adjacent, but overall they start taking up more and more of your time. You don't get to focus on the core. Focus on the stuff that's actually driving your business forward. Have to plan for growth when you join an engineering team too. Big questions. One of the biggest ones is, how big do you think your team needs to be to achieve the objectives that you've set forward in your strategies? And once you know that, everything else kind of falls in place too. Do you believe in DevOps? Do you believe in full stack developers? Those questions are different. Full stack is a totally natural, easy thing when you have 5 developers. When you're 100 developers, it has a whole set of extra challenges that are different things to consider. Do you believe in the microservices hype or Docker? Or what primary languages do you want to use? Do you believe that Python is everything? Or do you want to just go all Node? Or is React the framework you want to use? The important thing, from my perspective, is not to try to do everything. A lot of companies will let individual developers define their own preferences, and one developer will be using one framework, and he's all Angular, and the next guy is all React. It's a maintenance nightmare. So the more that you can figure this out in the beginning, the more that you can define it, the more successful you get to be. Growing a team, also very tricky. External recruiters are expensive. It's a painful thing when you're talking to an external recruiter and they want to charge you 10, 20, 25% of an employee's salary to hire them. Ultimately, when you're small, I think you have to bite the bullet. There's a cost to delaying your hiring. Your revenues aren't going to grow. You're not going to be able to realize your vision. It's better to get the people in place as soon as possible to get the ball rolling as quickly as possible. Next thing to do is who you're hiring, stay away from too many senior people. When you hire too many senior people into the team, there have expectations, there's ego that's involved. There's often almost technical religious wars that can start when one senior person believes in one way of building things and another believes in another, and it causes problems. If you can hire from universities, if you can hire junior developers, the senior people in the team are able to kind of convince them and groom them into the way that this current team is working. Not necessarily that other ways aren't equally as good, but as long as you can be consistent, it leads to more efficiency. Offshoring is another thing we did. Once we got to about 50 engineers, one of our engineers who's from Lithuania wanted to come home. And rather than letting him go home by himself and he was willing to work remotely for us, I was like, we wanted to make him successful. And we used that as an opportunity for us to build a team. We have 12 developers in Lithuania right now. And it's worked fantastically for us because we had the right person who understood what the business was, how our engineering team developed, to build a team around his knowledge and have the new team work the way that our team back in New York City worked. Doing the same thing now with another developer in India. We have 4 developers in India, same model. India is being our back-end team, and everyone in Lithuania is our front-end and middle layer. So here's our growth pattern. There's a lot here. It's probably my favorite slide I make. It's a couple months out of date, too. In the beginning, when I came, we were all full stack, really, which was perfect because we were busy trying to make everything work. When I realized how big the team had to get, I decided we'd go specialization. First thing happened, we did a bunch of front-end people, and the back-end team started to grow. Back-end's being done all in Java, which is great if you're a Java guy, which I am. The QA, if you notice, we didn't hire a QA resource for the first year, which was confusing, especially to my product team. I think with limited resources, dedicating to QA, especially when you're changing as rapidly as a young company, I guess we were 10 years old, but young in terms of the startup company, was changing, it's a tricky thing for QAing. And the impact of QA can be both enormous and, if you get the wrong QA person, trivial. So it was we were very, very, very deliberate when we finally brought in QA and started adding QA into the process of our team. And to speak more of the process, I'd like to introduce Tim Whitten, the VP of Engineering, who will talk about how our processes changed as we grow.
Thank you. Hey everyone, how's it going? So there's not many engineers here, so I'll try to couch this in terms of this is the types of things, if you hire a competent engineering lead, that they're going to be thinking about as you grow the team. And you, just as a business lead, a product lead, you need to be aware of these things happening. And why your tech lead may want to take time to change some processes or meet about how processes and different things will run. So as Ross said, 1stdibs started as a bootstrap company with the CEO and product founder working directly with a tech founder, very small team. They didn't really use a lot of standard product management, project management, or software development processes. They were a small team. They weren't tracking the project. They weren't managing source code. They weren't using continuous integration. They kind of would just write the stuff, push it out. There wasn't a lot of process around how new features were developed or why they were doing them. It was a sort of like the product founder would think, hey, we should do this thing, and tell the tech founder to do it, and then they would do that thing. When Ross came in and we started growing the team, he hired me to come in and help with the front end. And as we started to grow, we got more product managers, and more more engineers, and a product manager and individual engineers would work together using some project tracking. We use Jira and source code management. We use Git and GitHub, and that was working pretty good for the first year and a half. The team kept growing. We did some big releases, and we learned some things from that. As the team kept growing, we moved to Agile, and I put that in quotes because we use some of the processes of Agile or Scrum, and I'm sure if you're familiar with software development, you've heard about the different processes you use in Agile or Scrum. We kind of define it as just being able to iterate quickly. And to iterate quickly, your code has to be designed in a way that you can iterate quickly. It has to be modular. It has to be able to have different pieces come together, have individual developers work on different pieces without stepping on each other's toes. And then we also took the big kind of crowd team that we had, and we started splitting it into product-focused teams. And since we're an e-commerce marketplace, those teams consisted of product-facing features that are relevant to an e-commerce marketplace. If you're developing a business and you need to start breaking your team into product managers and engineers, working with them, you would make your own decisions based on your business. We were e-commerce, so we had teams that were called, that focused on top of the funnel, the e-commerce funnel, our checkout and transactions experience, our dealer tools, since we had a marketplace and dealers all over the world uploading items to the platform, that was important. And we ended up with 6 teams. And that was 2.5 years in, I think. We also just started defining sprints, which is another sort of agile concept. We decided on 2 weeks. Along with sprints comes the idea of a backlog, where you start listing tasks in your project management software that are product-facing features, any tech debt that you've been starting to take on, non-urgent bugs that are coming up. Along with backlog comes the idea of grooming. So you'd have a meeting once every 2 weeks. You'd look at the different tasks that are in your backlog, start to prioritize them. Engineers put estimates on them so that the business and the product folks know, how long is this going to take? Is this really going to meet the ROI I need on this thing? And we started using continuous integration, which means that all the engineers are committing code to different repositories, and we have automated processes to merge all that code together, run it through tests, deploy it to staging and QA servers and that kind of thing. And we were happy. We're like, hey, that's pretty good. And you might think that you have it set, but we kept growing. The business kept changing. Our strategy was changing. So we have to reevaluate and refine our different processes. We're getting more PMs, more engineers, more complexity. The engineers decided we needed to start doing code reviews. There was too much code coming in that wasn't being looked at and determined to be of a quality that we needed to have in our code base. This, from a business standpoint, or a product standpoint, this means that your engineers might slow down a bit. But if you don't adopt some practices like this, what you're going to have is more tech debt, more maintainability issues, which are harder to strategize around and consider the risk of, right? So if you just have lots of bugs going out because the code isn't being managed properly, there's no unit tests, there's no code reviews, you're going to have engineers whose productivity drops because they're putting out fires all the time. And we also, at this point, started breaking up sort of these monolithic code bases we had into smaller units that we could deploy without having side effects on other parts of the product. So we just had, our product detail page is one thing, and we'll just deploy that, and we know we're not going to break the search and browse experience. And we just keep doing that. We're adding more monitoring. New Relic is really helpful with that. Performance feeds back into our design decisions. Instead of just 6 teams, we're now more flexible. We have these tiger teams, which you have one particular business initiative. It may be over just half of the year that you want to attack that initiative. So you bring some experts from other teams, put them together, and you attack that one thing. Once you're done, that team can disperse, and you can go on to the next thing. We've been building in a little bit more DevOps into our front-end teams, and we're starting to experiment with daily releases as opposed to weekly releases that we do now. And that was it, kind of quickly. And I give it back to Ross.
Thanks. Thank you, Tim. When we started growing, we had to focus on where to put our resources. And of all the important things we did, we very much focused on conversion versus on growing the platform. Conversion, I mean, how many people are going to come onto our website and actually make a purchase? It's very easy to buy eyeballs. It's easy to sell $1 for 75 cents, as we say. What we wanted to do is make sure that the people that were coming to our site were qualified traffic, and we wanted to figure out ways of driving that qualified traffic. One of the most important ways we did it was organic traffic. We wanted to own all the keywords that people are searching for when they buy some of the furniture that's on our website. We did a lot of effort to grow it. It's been pretty successful over the year. And a lot of it is just following SEO best practices. It's constant. You have to always work on it. Every single time you're building any product, you have to consider what is the SEO ramifications of doing this. And we bite ourselves. We'll do something which hurts us in terms of how the organic traffic is working. That's why we're monitoring it constantly. And almost every time we do a release, I'm looking at our SEO experts going, did we break anything? Because it's critical to the business. It's free if you're doing it right. So you might as well get that traffic going. The biggest changes from my perspective as CTO is how we've changed the infrastructure. So I'm going to try to make this still, I think, mostly not engineer, so this isn't too scary, I promise. The way that our website looked when it started in 2001 is the way that most websites start. You've got one machine that has the web server on it that's serving content, as well as a database, which is holding all of your information. We're a marketplace, so we had the added complexity that we had two different types of users. We had buyers on the website, and we had dealers that were listing merchandise. So that was fine, worked pretty well to get going, and then the site started gaining traction, and Oprah mentioned it. And this was before we were ready for any real traffic, and it caused all sorts of massive problems. The tech founder did a natural thing. He's like, all right, the database blew up. Let's put the database on a dedicated machine. And he thought he was fine. It was still a little bit slow. And he's like, all right, well, let me split out the buyer web portal from the dealer web portal. Again, things were good until it got a little slower and more traffic. He started replicating the database. That was good, and then Oprah happened again. Second mention of Oprah, again, site toppled over for a few hours until the traffic died down. Kept on growing, things were fine, added more databases and more databases. 5 is going to be a little better. The site was painfully slow. This is the state it was in when I joined the company. This is when we were at 24 seconds for a search, or general crawl of the web pages being about 12 seconds. So first thing I did was evaluate how we were using the hardware that we had already currently paid for. We were hosted, we were in a colo location, and split it up. Decided to use the hardware more efficiently. We added Apache as Apache Solr as a search engine. Solr is like Elasticsearch. It's Lucene backed. It's effectively like having a little Google inside of your site that you can control and search the content from. We also got a reverse proxy load balancer. We use Varnish, which I can't recommend enough. It's a fantastic product. It both acts as a caching layer inside of your data center and lets you load balance and lets you do some logic at the edge. That was good. Next thing we did, we decided to add a CDN, which is natural. We started having some back-end developers. We made Java services, which began to be the interface from the front end to the database. That was great. And our contract was up. And at that point, I wasn't yet thrilled with AWS. This was a number of years ago. So we moved on to a rack space, and they required us to have a firewall, which I thought was a good idea. It wasn't. They required us to have a load balancer. That was a hardware load balancer. Thought that was a good idea. It also wasn't. But we had what I was pretty happy with lots of redundancy in the system, and it was pretty great. Next major change we made was we put the entire site, the www, started going through the CDN as well. And that led to enormous performance improvements. Might be confusing for people out there. I'm not sure how many people understand what a CDN is. Show of hands, who knows what a CDN is? It's a content distribution network. CDNs basically are having data centers all over the world that can serve your content. Typically, companies will use it for images and static resources so that they're cached not in the internal company's data center, but closer to the end user. Get a basic example of how the web works to understand why it's useful. Imagine this guy wants to buy a nice chair from 1stdibs. He happens to be located in Mexico City. He types 1stdibs.com into his web browser. DNS looks that up, figures out that 1stdibs.com happens to be hosted in, let's say, Northern Virginia. And there goes the web page, goes over to him. All right. That is actually horrible. Internet's slow. It's a very, very slow thing. Every time you have distance between your data center and the end user, you're delivering a bad experience to the end user. Also, having your origin exposed to the end users puts yourself at vulnerability for all sorts of bugs. We got hit by this company, Superfish, which wasn't anything malicious. It's a web crawler that does not great things. But they were crawling our website, and they had a bug in their crawler, and they basically hit us with way more traffic than our site could handle. And we were behind a CDN at this point, but it was a CDN that wasn't configured very well, I'll put it that way. And the CDN actually toppled over, and a good amount of our traffic wasn't working. We then went to a better CDN and fixed things. But so the way that it worked before, say we have all these illustrious people who wanted to go to the site, all of them would see 1stdibs.com, and the people that were close to the origin would get the site pretty quickly. People that were a little bit further away, takes a little bit longer, and then you get people that are very far, takes a painfully long time. And I'm not sure who's worse to upset, Putin or Russell Crowe, both of whom are not known for having good temperaments. Might be too close distance-wise to say that here. We use Fastly as our CDN. All these red dots you see are where their data centers are. So whenever someone wants to get data from 1stdibs, it's actually coming from these data centers, not our origin. So now, when all these people go to our website, they look up 1stdibs.com, they get a whole bunch of different data centers that are close to these end users. And the content gets to them really quickly. So how much faster? You should see this. Oh, sorry, before I get that, we actually had another attack after we were behind a properly configured CDN, and this huge spike in traffic. It's almost a 10-fold increase. We actually didn't notice it happen. The site was performing fine. Everything was cached. There was no problem. We just noticed it because of this graph happened to be spiking, and we noticed the graph. And then we had the CDN block the malicious traffic, and it went back to being happy very quickly. Speed improvement was huge. You can see that we're having speed times are cut down basically in half almost everywhere, with the exception of Sydney. Sydney was a weird thing. We were trying to figure out what happened here. You'll see that sometimes Sydney was acting very fast, other times it was very slow. To explain why that was happening, let's look at how two other people in Australia might be looking at things. Let's say Russell Crowe and Nicole Kidman, both of whom want to shop. Russell Crowe wants to go first. He types in 1stdibs.com. The DNS points him to the POP, a point of presence that's in, let's say, it's almost Sydney. And that point of presence doesn't know anything about 1stdibs yet. It makes a request back to our origin, which is located in the States. Origin returns the website to that POP with a cache header saying how long this content should be cached for, and then that goes to Russell Crowe. When Nicole Kidman looks things up, she already goes, the data center that's close to her already has the content. It's returned very quickly. So those are the different spikes. Russell Crowe would have been the slow one. Nicole Kidman would have been fast. What we did was we realized that for things like the homepage, it doesn't change that often. So rather than having a 10-minute cache, which was original, we upped it to a week. And then any time that we would actually change the homepage, which is more frequently than a week, we would explicitly purge it from the CDN. So we'd have the benefit of long cache duration in the CDN, short cache duration in the end user's browser. And it had a dramatic impact on how its traffic in Sydney went. You look at it even further. Again, this is the first dip that you see is when we went dub behind the CDN. The second dip is when we upped the cache duration to a week. North and Europe, you had similarly fantastic reaction when we did the dub behind the CDN. North America, also great. The only reason it doesn't look quite as great is because it was already pretty good since it was close to our origin. Asia seems pretty great. We were wondering why. We did a little bit of look, and the damn government firewalls really hard to get around the speed improvements there. Because even though we had the POP that was closely located to these countries, to get into the internal networks, we still had to go through the government systems. So back to the system, infrastructure. Our image array, we were not using S3 at this point because we were doing a lot of image manipulation on disk. We moved that up to AWS. We could expand the images. With the end goal of trying to get that up into S3. We then moved our database between there and had some of our admin website being served out of Amazon. We had more fun. We put our entire service layer over in AWS. This is all part of our migration and how we got over to be fully there. Everything was going great. We moved images up into S3. And then Solar blew up on us. We did a big release, which changed how things were searched. Solar was messed up. We went back to the tech founder solution, and we decided to throw a whole bunch of hardware at it. Amazon made that easy to temporarily triage by adding a whole bunch of Solar nodes. Got that whole thing fixed, and we went fully into AWS. And this is actually where we are now. That's how our entire system's read. Other changes that we've made, we now statically we generate our PDPs, our product details pages. We actually cache those in S3 as well. Fastly as a CDN lets us do logic, and we're able to look in the S3 cache for all of our product details pages, see if the page is there, serve it from S3 if it's there. If not, it goes back to our origin and generates it, so it's an extra layer in case things fall out of cache. Where we're going in the future is red, blue, or Mario, Luigi type deployment, where we're having 2 different data centers, and we allow us to flip between the 2 different data centers, depending on whether or not we have new code in one, old code in Luigi. We can patch Mario to be new, or if we want to do a test in Mario, we can direct 10% of our traffic to Mario, 90% of it's still going to Luigi. I'm out of time, which is a shame, because I have my grumpy old man slide. There's a lot of tech trends that are out there, which I'm not a huge fan of, but if anyone wants to find me afterwards, I'm happy to tell them why. Full stack, I hate. DevOps, I actually do not like, and I think it wastes a lot of time. Microservices, I think, are a joke. JavaScript framework du jour, there's always a new one, and it's probably not a good one. NoSQL is fortunately a trend that I think is getting put into a properly small niche. Hibernate and its ilk, usually it's a waste of time. You should just write the SQL yourself. Containers and Dockers, I don't get, but that's probably me just being a grumpy old man because I think everyone else really likes it for a reason. All right, thank you all very, very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Okay, thank you so much. Maybe we have some questions.
Oh, time for questions.
Questions. Well, they're chilling, you know, so.
Beanbag chairs are very comfy.
Yeah. Okay, so in this case, I do have a question. You were talking a lot about strategy planning. So strategy planning in a certain timeline can be a tricky business. So how do you think a starting startup should plan their strategy? How far should reach into the future? A year, a 2, 20?
Be aware of where you want to go 3 years in the future, but know that whatever plan you come up with today is not going to be where you're doing even 6 months from now. So we get pretty specific in the priorities for 6-month windows, and we then spend those 6-month windows really working as hard as we can on the specific tasks. And then we're reevaluating in the middle of the 6 months, and then we're having a long evaluation for what we want to do for the next 6 months. So data on the ground sometimes changes it, but that's a good way to focus. And you also have to be aware of that 3-year goal, because not all tasks can be completed in 6 months. So it's important to take those big year-long projects or 2-year-long projects and start them and prioritize them as well.